There's a moment in television history that most fans of The Carol Burnett Show remember as one of the funniest sketches the series ever produced. Eunice Higgins, the desperate, dream-chasing housewife Carol Burnett played for years, finally gets her shot at fame. A spot on the 1970s talent show phenomenon, The Gong Show. The sketch aired on February 12, 1977, and for millions of viewers it was 11 o'clock on a Saturday night, comfort food. Broad, silly, and warm. But underneath the laughter was something else. Eunice wasn't just a punchline that night. She was a woman who believed, with her whole heart, that this was her one chance to matter, and the studio audience was laughing at the very thing that was breaking her. That tension between comedy and heartbreak is the quiet engine that ran underneath almost everything Carol Burnett ever did. To understand why a single sketch from 1977 still gets talked about as one of the rawest things she ever put on screen, you have to go back much further than 1977. You have to go back to a one-room apartment in Hollywood, a grandmother who saved a little girl's life just by loving her, and a woman who spent 5 decades turning her own pain into something the whole country could laugh with instead of at. Carol Burnett was born on April 26, 1933, in San Antonio, Texas. Her parents, Joseph and Ina Burnett, both struggled with alcoholism, and neither was able to provide the stability a young child needed. Her father worked on and off at movie theaters. Her mother dreamed, at various points, of being a writer. Neither dream survived contact with the bottle. Both of Carol's parents would eventually die of alcohol-related illness, her father when she was a teenager and her mother years later. What saved Carol was her grandmother, Mabel Eudora White, whom she called Nanny. In 1940, Nanny brought 7-year-old Carol from Texas to Hollywood, where the two of them settled into a small apartment on Wilcox Avenue, subsisting on Nanny's welfare checks and whatever odd jobs she could find. It was not a glamorous life. It was, by Burnett's own later accounts, a life of counting pennies and stretching a can of soup across 2 meals. But it was also a life with someone in it who showed up every single day. Money was so tight that trips to the movies, a Saturday ritual for Carol and her grandmother, were treated like small miracles. For a few hours in a darkened theater, the two of them could watch other people's glamorous, orderly lives unfold on screen, then walk back out into their own considerably less orderly one. Burnett has spoken for decades about how much those Saturday matinees shaped her. They were her first real exposure to the idea that a story, well told, could make people forget their troubles for a while. It is not hard to draw a line from a hungry little girl sitting in a dark theater to a grown woman who spent 11 years building an entire show around the idea that laughter could be a form of rescue. She also invented her own escape at home. Alone in that cramped apartment, young Carol created an imaginary twin she called Karen. More confident, more glamorous, always ready with a joke. It was a child's game, but it hinted at something that would define her entire career. An instinct for slipping into another persona when reality got too heavy to hold. By the time she finished high school, Carol had her sights set on journalism, partly because her mother had once wanted to be a writer, and Carol felt a pull to finish what her mother couldn't. She enrolled at UCLA, but tuition, even at the comparatively modest rates of the early 1950s, was more than she and her grandmother could scrape together. This is where one of the most famous and most genuinely verified stories of Burnett's early life comes in. An anonymous stranger paid her way. She never learned who it was. In later interviews, she has described it simply as an act of pure generosity from someone who asked for nothing in return, not even a thank you. It is the kind of story that sounds too tidy to be true, except Burnett has told it, consistently, for decades. At UCLA, an elective theater course changed the direction of her life. She discovered, almost by accident, that she could make an entire room of people laugh, and that doing so felt like coming up for air after years underwater. She switched her focus from journalism to theater arts, a decision that felt reckless at the time and turned out to be the best one she ever made. She was quickly recognized as one of the most promising talents in UCLA's theater program, a small but important vote of confidence for a young woman who had spent most of her life being told, implicitly, that she didn't have room to dream big. In the mid-1950s, another act of unexpected generosity pushed Burnett's career forward. While working as an usherette and quietly saving what little money she had, she and her college boyfriend Don Soroyan met a wealthy benefactor who offered to loan the money to move to New York and try to break into show business. On the condition that they never reveal his identity, use the money only to get to New York and pay it forward to others someday if they succeeded. Burnett and Soroyan took him up on it, arrived in New York in 1954, and settled into the Rehearsal Club, a boarding house for young women pursuing careers in the arts. Her earliest big break was almost absurd in its premise, a comic love song called I Made a Fool of Myself over John Foster Dulles, a tongue-in-cheek ballad about the famously stern Eisenhower-era Secretary of State. The novelty of it caught on, and it led to appearances on The Jack Paar Show and, in January 1957, The Ed Sullivan Show. From there, work started to come steadily. A supporting role in the short-lived Broadway show Stanley opposite Buddy Hackett, guest spots, small television gigs. Everything shifted in 1959 when Burnett landed the lead role of Princess Winifred in Once Upon a Mattress, an off-Broadway musical that transferred to Broadway and turned into a genuine hit. The role, a loud, unglamorous, hilariously physical inversion of the typical fairy tale princess, earned her a Tony nomination and made her a name to watch. That same year, she paid back the loan that had gotten her to New York in the first place. The benefactor, true to his word, never came forward to be thanked. From 1959 to 1962, Burnett was a regular on The Gary Moore Show, a CBS variety program that became something of a finishing school for her particular brand of comedy. Moore's loose, improvisational style, including unscripted audience Q&A sessions before tapings, planted the seed for what would later become one of the signature elements of Burnett's own show, her famous opening where she'd take questions directly from the studio audience. She won her first Emmy Award during her run on Moore's show, and the exposure made her one of the most recognizable comedic performers on American television. In 1962, Burnett and a then lesser-known Julie Andrews teamed up for a television special filmed at Carnegie Hall, Julie and Carol at Carnegie Hall. CBS executives were reportedly reluctant to greenlight it, unsure that pairing two women, one already a TV fixture, one still building her film career, would draw an audience. The special went forward anyway and became a critical and commercial success, earning an Emmy and cementing the idea that Burnett could carry a show built entirely on her own comedic and musical instincts. The Carol Burnett Show premiered on CBS on September 11th, 1967. It would run for 11 seasons until March 1978, becoming one of the most acclaimed variety programs in the history of American television. It was groundbreaking for a simple, almost radical reason. It was one of the first shows of its kind to be led by a woman, at a time when the variety format, and television generally, was overwhelmingly run by men. Burnett didn't just star in it. She had creative control over it, something almost unheard of for a woman in her position at the time. The show built a devoted following through its ensemble. Harvey Korman, Vicki Lawrence, Lyle Waggoner, and later Tim Conway all became essential parts of its chemistry. It leaned heavily on live studio comedy, sketches performed in front of a real audience with minimal safety net, which meant genuine mistakes, genuine laughter, and genuine moments of cast members breaking character became part of the show's charm rather than something to be edited out. That willingness to let the seams show, to let real laughter interrupt the script, is often cited as a direct influence on the format that Saturday Night Live would adopt just a few years later. Over its run, the show won 25 Primetime Emmy Awards, recognized for writing, choreography, musical staging, and outstanding variety series, among other categories. Harvey Korman alone won 4 Emmys for his supporting work, and Tim Conway won 4 of his own. Burnett herself took home 2 Golden Globes for Best Actress in a Comedy or Musical Series in 1977 and 1978, and the show was named Favorite Variety Program at the People's Choice Awards 3 years running. Behind the scenes, the show ran on a kind of loyalty that's rare in television. When Harvey Korman went through a rough patch during production and clashed with Burnett over his attitude on set, She didn't quietly write him off. She confronted him directly, and when he asked for another chance, she gave him one. Their working relationship survived the friction and went on to produce some of the show's most beloved material. Tim Conway, for his part, was famous for holding back his best improvisational bits until the live taping specifically to catch his castmates off guard, a habit that produced some of the show's most spontaneous, unscripted laughter, including moments where Corman and Burnett genuinely could not keep a straight face on camera. Among all the recurring characters Burnett created, none endured quite like Eunice Higgins, the anxious, embittered, endlessly striving daughter at the center of a recurring sketch series called The Family, which debuted in the 1973-74 season. Eunice lived with her cantankerous mother, Mama Harper, played by Vicki Lawrence, and her indifferent husband Ed, played by Harvey Korman. The sketches mined real, uncomfortable dynamics, a family that loved each other and also wounded each other constantly, a woman who wanted more out of life than the small, disappointing one she'd been handed. What made Eunice work, and what made her occasionally devastating rather than merely funny, was that Burnett refused to play her as a cartoon. Eunice's ambition, her resentment, her flashes of real cruelty toward the people closest to her were all recognizably human. Burnett has said in interviews over the years that there was more of her own life in Eunice than in almost any other character she played. The poverty, the yearning for a bigger life, the complicated love for a mother figure who couldn't always give her what she needed. That's what made the February 1977 Gong Show sketch land the way it did. In the bit, Eunice, thrilled beyond words at the idea of finally being seen, auditions for the Gong Show, the era's reigning showcase for talentless hopefuls being mocked on national television. She sings her heart out. She is, of course, gonged. The studio audience roared, because on its surface it's a broad, silly sketch about a delusional woman embarrassing herself on a game show. But watch closely. There's a beat right before and right after the gong sounds where Burnett lets something genuinely wounded show through Eunice's eyes. The split second where a woman who has spent her whole life being overlooked realizes it's happening again, this time in front of an audience. That kind of tonal high-wire act, real ache hiding inside broad comedy, became something of a specialty for Burnett throughout the Family sketches, and fans and critics alike have singled out the Gong Show episode specifically as one of the moments where the show pushed furthest into that uncomfortable, honest territory before pulling back into the safety of the laugh track. It's the reason clips from that sketch keep resurfacing decades later. Not because it's the show's funniest 5 minutes, but because it's one of the rare instances where you can watch a comedian let genuine pain flicker across a character's face without breaking the comedy around it. The Family sketches eventually evolved beyond the original variety show. In 1982, CBS aired Eunice, a made-for-television film that dramatized the character's backstory across several decades with far less comedy and far more unfiltered sadness than the original sketches. A project Burnett has described as an attempt to show what was really underneath the character the audience had spent years laughing at. That film, in turn, led to the spin-off sitcom Mama's Family, which Burnett did not stay attached to for long, reportedly unhappy with the direction the show took the characters once it moved away from her creative involvement. Burnett's personal life ran on a parallel track of triumph and hardship. Her first marriage, to actor Don Soroyan, whom she met at UCLA, ended in divorce in 1962 after the pressures of two very different career trajectories pulled them apart. She married television producer Joe Hamilton the following year. The two worked together for years on The Carol Burnett Show and had 3 daughters, Carrie, Jody, and Erin. That marriage ended in divorce in 1984, after 2 decades that included both professional triumph and mounting personal strain. In 1976, the National Enquirer published a story falsely claiming Burnett had been drunk and disorderly at a Washington restaurant in an altercation involving Henry Kissinger. The claim struck a particular nerve because Burnett had spent years publicly speaking about her parents' struggles with alcoholism, and being falsely painted as drunk in public was, by her own account, a direct hit to something deeply personal. She sued the tabloid for defamation, and the case became a landmark one, a rare instance of a celebrity taking a tabloid to trial rather than settling quietly and winning. A jury initially awarded her a substantial judgment. The amount was later reduced through the appeals process, and the case ultimately settled. More than the money, Burnett has said, the case was about proving that tabloids couldn't simply print anything they wanted about a person's private conduct without consequence. And the case is still cited today in discussions of celebrity privacy and defamation law. The hardest chapter of her personal life centered on her eldest daughter, Carrie Hamilton, who began using drugs as a young teenager in the late 1970s. Carrie later spoke publicly about wanting to escape the identity of being Carol Burnett's daughter and find something that felt entirely her own, even if that meant self-destruction. Burnett has described those years as the most frightening of her life. Rehab stays, relapses, a period where she genuinely feared she might lose her daughter permanently. Carrie eventually got sober in her late teens, and while their relationship went through a painful period of distance during the worst of it, mother and daughter ultimately grew extraordinarily close. They went on to work together, and Carrie eventually co-wrote a play with her mother, Hollywood Arms, based on Burnett's childhood with her grandmother in Hollywood. Carrie Hamilton died in 2002 of lung cancer that had metastasized to her brain. She was 38 years old and never saw Hollywood Arms open on stage. It debuted on Broadway the following year. Burnett has said that finishing and staging the play after Carrie's death felt like something she owed her daughter. In the late 1990s, Burnett met Brian Miller while performing in Long Beach, California. The two married in 2001, just months before Carrie's death, and Miller has been credited by Burnett with helping her survive that period of grief. More recently, in 2020, Burnett and Miller took on legal guardianship of her grandson Dylan, the son of her youngest daughter Erin, who has spoken publicly about her own long struggle with addiction. It was, by all accounts, a decision made out of the same instinct that has run through Burnett's entire life, stepping in to protect family, even when doing so is painful. What separates Burnett from many of her contemporaries is that she never really stopped. In 1997, she won an Emmy for a guest role on Mad About You, proof that her comedic instincts translated easily from broad sketch comedy to the more grounded rhythms of a modern sitcom. She lent her voice to animated films through the 2000s, including a turn in the 2008 adaptation of Horton Hears a Who alongside Jim Carrey and Steve Carell. In 1999, she returned to Broadway after a 30-year absence for Stephen Sondheim's musical review, Putting It Together, proving her stage instincts hadn't dulled a bit. In 2022, at 89 years old, Burnett appeared in the final season of Better Call Saul as Marion, an elderly neighbor whose quiet, growing suspicion of the show's central con man drives one of the series' most tense and unsettling storylines. Series co-creator Vince Gilligan has spoken about how uncomfortable it was to write a scene in which that character was put in danger, given Burnett's stature as one of the most beloved performers in American entertainment. 2 years later, she returned to television again in Apple TV Plus's Palm Royale, playing Norma, a wealthy Palm Beach socialite who spends much of the series in a coma before waking up mid-season, a role that required Burnett, then 91, to build a character almost entirely out of physical comedy and improvised, half-formed speech. The performance earned her an Emmy nomination and made her the oldest woman ever nominated in the category's history. Across 7 decades, Carol Burnett built a career out of a simple but demanding idea, that comedy works best when it's honest about what it's covering up. The little girl who stole toilet paper from a movie theater bathroom because there wasn't enough at home grew into a performer who could make an entire country laugh on a Saturday night, and every so often let them see just enough of the ache underneath to make the laughter mean something. The 1977 Gong Show sketch endures not because it's a secret, shameful thing Burnett has spent decades avoiding, but because it's one of the clearest windows the show ever gave audiences into how much genuine feeling she poured into a character who, on paper, was just there to make people laugh. That's the through line of her entire career, on screen and off, a willingness to sit inside real pain. Her parents' addiction, a false tabloid story, her daughter's illness, her grandson's needs, and turn it again and again into something that helped other people feel less alone. Carol Burnett didn't just make America laugh for 11 years straight. She showed several generations of performers that comedy and heartbreak were never really opposites to begin with.